It's like anyone that wanted to pick a lock will pick one. So we had one guy in class that had some disabilities that he couldn't fully use his hands, but he was able to figure out a way to hold the locks and use the picks to unlock the lock. So it was pretty cool.
If you're going to be late next time, we're going to try this lock.
It's pretty funny last night because at Dallas Hackers, there was a guy that came there for the first time last month, and he was talking about how that from learning how to lockpick helped him out because he was at work and he didn't have a key to his door, and so he had a paper able to lock or unlock the door with the paper clip. Otherwise, he's going to have to walk home. Yeah, his car keys, I guess, from the office. I guess he's leaving and locked his car keys in his office. Yeah, so the lock picking will be next Thursday. I actually sent the message to the wrong person. But yeah, did everyone see that? Okay. So tonight we're covering analyzing vulnerabilities. So after you've collected all this information, you need to analyze that data. So you'll analyze vulnerability scan results, leverage information to prepare for exploitation. So this also includes going through and validating those vulnerabilities to make sure that they are exploitable in the first place and try to find exploits for them. Asset category, the process of placing business assets with similar characteristics into the same group. Helps a business shape how it works with each asset. Example, how it prioritizes what assets receive what protections. Useful to pen testers to determine how to approach exploitation. Assets in one category might be treated as less relevant or less applicable. Assets in another category may be more important or more applicable. Categories may vary from circumstance to circumstance. Example categories: public, private, restricted, and confidential. Just kind of real world notes. All this stuff is good to know, especially if you're going to take the certification exam. But some of the stuff in real world doesn't get that that regimented in structure. A lot of cases, most times when I'm doing a pen test, if I'm doing an internal network pen test, then I'm doing my scans, port and service scans, and then I'll do vulnerability scans, analyze that stuff, and exploit it. So it doesn't go in a lot of detailed process to get to that point. But I mean, I would say that some of the information you're getting here would be helpful if you're going to be a consultant and be in business for yourself. Knowing these steps are more important. This would be kind of information, or also if you're a project manager, knowing more of the detail of this to make sure a project's being done correctly. Not to say to ignore this stuff, but you're looking at all this stuff probably going through here and thought, man, that's a lot of stuff, non-technical stuff to keep up with. But when you really get down to the nuts and bolts of it, it's really more of a higher level. There's these different areas you're now analyzing stuff, and you'll look at the goal of the pen test. If you're looking for, credit card data or something like that, PII, private identifiable information, in some of those cases, then yeah, that's what you're going for. So you want to go keep up and meet the goals of the pen test, but sometimes it's not always as formal. And like we talked about, threat modeling, that's important too, but that becomes more important on the more complex pen test. So real world, you may not be necessarily performing, an actual threat model for every test. So Paul asked if it'll be streamed. Let's see. We'll have the stream going. I haven't done video with this yet, so I'll attempt to stream the video. And so previous categories describe sensitivity of data in terms of needs or protections. Helps you make decisions about what assets are the most challenging to compromise, the most likely to be targeted, the most valuable to an attacker, the most devastating to a business. There are other ways to approach categorization, categories that describe assets in terms of business roles, people, hardware, software, data, physical environment, processes, and third parties. Exploiting roles might have greater impact on business. And false positives. Reasons for false positives: vendor may be trying to make their product look better. Scanners can't recognize compensating controls. Scanner is using outdated vulnerability databases. Scanner scores a vulnerability higher than it should be. Target environment customizations trip up scanner. Scanner is improperly configured. Identify false positives to avoid wasting time on dead ends. So this is part of your validation. When you find your vulnerabilities, you want to make sure that it's not a false positive. And sometimes just changing like a FTP or HTTP header can throw off a scanner. And some of the tips to securing like your web servers, sometimes you want to suppress in the HTTP header what version of IIS or the web server you're using. A lot of times you want to suppress that information, especially the server information or the version information, because an attacker, when they're doing their enumeration, or a pen tester, when you're doing your recon and enumeration, you look for those versions to be able to launch attacks against those systems. So these are the things that might trip a vulnerability scanner if people are removing the information from the headers, because some of the ways vulnerability scanners will work, it'll look at the header information for that particular service and it'll pull information from there. That's one of the ways that it fingerprints that target. False positives continued here. Results validation is effective. Compare what you have learned to the individual results. Are results truly applicable and accurate? Scanner may be an error. Example, vulnerability identified SMB1, but you already know that you're running SMB3. Easy to defend, easier for defensive teams to identify false positives. Pen testers may have gaps in knowledge. You may not be able to avoid all false positives. And so this is where some of your manual testing comes in, that you just can't rely on just your vulnerability scanner. Or when you go do your validation, you'll use other tools like Nmap and some other scripts to validate that they're not false positives. And also you can find false negatives, which means that are vulnerabilities that the scanner didn't find, so that you may pick up along the way too. I've run scripts and other tools that I've found vulnerabilities with that the vulnerability scanner has missed. And then when you go from different versions of the vulnerability scanner, there's things you could miss, and you could run a different vulnerability scanner as well to validate your findings. And this is where, where they're talking about pen testers may have gaps in knowledge. So this is where it's really important that you have some kind of security or IT background. A lot of people want to jump right into pen testing because it's, sounds fun. But so don't, if you're wanting to be a good pen tester, then make sure to, try and learn these different technologies and learn about security. If you happen to get a job in pen testing, get your foot in the door, then, make sure to try to learn these things along the way, because the better you understand those technologies, you can tell if it's a false positive or not. You know how to hack those systems, and then you can tell how to better defend. And just on top of that, I've known some really good pen testers that, that are fairly new still, but they come from like a sysadmin background or networking background, and they've worked with these different technologies. So they're able to get on there knowing, okay, if you don't secure this correctly, then it's possible to exploit it. So just having that knowledge is very important. Adjudication, the process of evaluating and ranking vulnerabilities in terms of the potential threat they may pose to the organization. Also implies action can or will be taken to minimize threat. Important factor in prioritizing exploit efforts, goal to maximize test efficiency. Consider using an established system. CVSS is open standard for ranking vulnerabilities. I've seen this used a lot. We actually use this ourselves. Quantifies vulnerability data through 3 metric groups. Scoring is numerical with associated ratings. CVSS is leveraged and recognized by vulnerability databases, the US government's NVD, paired with vulnerabilities in CVE. And a lot of the vulnerability scanners will have these scores in them too. So you'll actually get the CVSS scores, because whenever you look at your vulnerabilities, it may say high, medium, low, or informational. And there's kind of a risk rating on high. Doesn't mean it's exactly a level 10. So by those numbers, you can kind of tell how to prioritize. Maybe it's a high risk and it's like 7.6 like this. And you may have one that would be 9 or 10, which would be ranked higher. So it gives you a little more granularity to rating the risks of your vulnerabilities. Then of course, if it's exploitable, the likelihood of exploitable, then it's more high risk. Need to decide what to dedicate time and money on. You have deadline to vulnerability prioritization. You have a deadline and limited budget. You determine what vulnerabilities get most attention, time and money used effectively. Adjudication will influence prioritization. Critical vulnerabilities will have highest priority, easiest to exploit, and have most impact. And these kind of also relate to remediation. So these are the things you're going to look at remediation. The more critical ones are the ones you're going to work on first. But like this makes a lot of sense. If you're wanting to exploit something, then you're going to look at more critical vulnerabilities, because you may have an easier time getting in to something there may be known exploits, because a lot of times that risk criticality is based on whether it's exploitable or not. Not always best to prioritize by threat rating. Strikes a balance between ease of exploitation and impact, informed by client's environment. Example, domain controllers compromises has severe consequences, but may be difficult. You may demote critical vulnerabilities and promote higher medium. Prioritization also influenced by mitigation cost, difficult for organizations to fix some vulnerabilities. More likely they'll accept the risk. So you see this a lot of times. I had a company that I was able to get in from the outside through a SQL injection vulnerability, and the customer filed a risk exception because it was in their development environment, although I was able to get in externally into their network, which they should have taken more seriously, because I could have gotten from that server to other servers internally, but it was a web application pen test. So that server was the only server in scope. So technically I wasn't supposed to go past that server, and that's why we didn't test past there. Can you go in more details with ease of exploitation? The rubric set for that, because I was always a little fuzzy on easy versus hard. Let's see, ease of exploitation. Part of it, I guess, would be kind of what's involved in it. For instance, if there is known Metasploit exploits for it, then that'd be could be a little easier, but doesn't always mean. If it's requires some kind of programming for your exploit, then it could be a little more difficult. Those are, I'm trying to think what else. And sometimes it's just the steps you have to set up. Say, for instance, if it's like some particular web application vulnerability where you may have to stand up a web server and set up a page to be able to exploit that. So the time and amount of time you have to go into setting up that exploit to perform it. I think it's kind of, I haven't seen anything that the only way I've seen to gauge whether it's easy versus hard, I've seen like there's like a success rating. If you look at Metasploit, at the exploits in there, it will tell you the success level, whether it's, excellent, like excellent, normal, or difficult. So that would be that would be more or less, actually, I guess, the the likelihood of the exploit being successful. I don't know if that cleared anything up for you, James. If not, let me know more detail. Okay, just want to make sure. But sometimes, I mean, it's just when you get into to expand on that a little bit more, it's just like, you know, if it requires any kind of coding or, like I said, setting up like some of the until Burp Suite came out with for like click jacking, they have like a little plugin where you could test that. Used to create a proof of concept for that. It was a little more difficult. There's some other exploits that require you to run like some kind of Java server on your system attack. So I guess that would be something that makes it more difficult. Okay. Prioritize also influenced by mitigation and cost. And this is also goes into remediation. Companies will look at the cost of it. Sometimes that's where they file exceptions because say like it costs, you know, $100,000 to put in some special type of hardware to protect it, then they're going to be less likely to fix that. And a lot of times, say if it's just like an informational website and it's not like e-commerce, any kind of customer information, then they may be less likely to spend the money to mitigate that. If it's setting at a hosting company where it's not in proximity to any of the other applications or websites, then they may not worry about it, because if they breach that, then they're possibly can get to the web hosting company's other sites and not their internal assets. More likely to accept risk. Yeah. Your chance of exploitation might be better. Common themes: lacks security, lacks physical security, employees not following policies and best practices, lack of adequate training, lack of software patching, lack of OS hardening, poor software development practices, use of outdated networking protocols, use of obsolete cryptographic protocols. So yeah, you run into a lot of that. One of the things that you'll see a lot is just a lot of weak cryptographic protocols being used. They're using like maybe still using SSL in some cases instead of TLS 1.1 or higher. You might be able to stumble on a pattern of behavior. Pattern can extend to assets you haven't tested. So you can find some vulnerability that's exploitable in there that you can exploit in other systems in enterprise. Say like they're running ASP and you find a vulnerability in their ASP application servers, then there's a good chance that they have other applications running the same frameworks. And then a lot of times if you find passwords on some of the service accounts, you may be able to reuse them. So that's where we're seeing these patterns and reusing in other areas. You can make educated guesses about how to test other assets, can make your job easier, can lead you down useful paths you wouldn't have taken otherwise. Identify common themes, provide you with more complete pictures. Guidelines for analyzing security vulnerability scan results. Determine an approach to categorize client assets. Categorize assets according to choose approach. Identify reasons why a scanner may produce false positives. Conduct results validation. Acknowledge you may not be able to estimate, you may not be able to eliminate false positives entirely. Rank vulnerabilities in terms of potential threats they pose. Consider using an established ranking system like the CVSS. Prioritize vulnerabilities to use your time and money effectively. And speaking of false positives, like HP Fortify and IBM AppScan, those are some vulnerability scanners, web application vulnerability scanners. And as far as false positives go, your web application vulnerability scanners tend to find more false positives than like the network vulnerability scanners. And a couple of companies, a couple of companies I've worked at consulting, we didn't even use vulnerability scanners. We just used the scanner built into Burp Suite because it would find vulnerabilities, but there wasn't as many false positives with it as there was others. And then you just kind of build on that with manual testing. Okay. Use threat rankings to influence how to prioritize your vulnerabilities. Strike a balance between vulnerabilities, impact, and ease of exploitation. Consider mitigation costs as an effect on your vulnerability prioritization. Identify common themes in your vulnerability results. A large pattern of behavior on future efforts. Testing efforts. Use common themes to develop more complete picture. And here they're kind of giving a scenario. Their activities, time to analyze, recon, and scan findings. You review vulnerabilities in the scans of the GCPG servers and the BXB web app. You determine will influence what you determine will influence the exploits tactics you use. So some of these little activities, I guess you kind of see through the book, but you can work on some of these. The act of recognizing vulnerability mapping, the act of recognizing the connection between a vulnerability and its associated target. Target can be a person, process, device, etc. Give your reference for choosing attack techniques and exploits, more comprehensive than a single scan result, informed by all scans. Update mapping with new discovered vulnerabilities. Can also contain non-technical information like phishing targets or weaknesses. Can separate document or part of larger tactical planning documents. Activity priorities. Give priority to activities that are more likely to achieve objectives. Day-to-day activities may have shifting priorities. Some investigations turn up promising leads. Some reach dead ends. May need to shift priorities based on time constraints or target availability. Best practices, project manage pen test team. Give early priorities to time consuming or opportunity activities. Give priority to activities most likely to reveal new targets and vectors. Consider going after quick wins or low hanging fruit to demonstrate success when asked. Yeah, this is really important here. Project managers for a pen test makes a big difference. When I was consulting, they had project managers, which they refer to as engagement managers, and they would interface with the customers and they would collect information that we needed to do the pen test, schedule like kickoff meetings to discuss the pen test, which saves a lot of time. And the company I work for now, when I started out, we're a bank, we're not consultants, but we would bring in, at first we were having to collect our information. So we're trying to finish up a pen test. And then we would have to go to the other business groups, say, hey, we need the IP addresses or URLs for this pen test and collect all this information. And then you're spending time on that. And anyone who works in IT here knows when you're trying to get information from other groups, sometimes it doesn't go so quickly. So if you're trying to do other pen tests, and sometimes it's hard to follow up and get this information. It can be time consuming. And, a lot of times you'll drop the ball because you need to be doing a pen test instead. So having a project manager has helped us a lot. We've almost doubled our production by just adding a project manager, because he's able to go out and get all this information, get any of the calls set up, get us the information from the pen test, so we don't have to go into these systems. Because the difficult things sometimes when you work internally for a company as a pen tester, when you have to go collect this stuff, we've got different systems, databases that the servers are kept in that we got to pull this information from, make sure that the servers are in production, and check the scope. And we got someone else doing this. It saves a lot of time. Like I said, we doubled production by having a project manager. Common techniques for attacks, common types of attacks, social engineering, code command injection. Yeah, that's correct. You about the PM comment. They better know their stuff, and that's one of the learning curves when people become a project manager for pen testing. They have to learn the methodology at a high level. So like the PTS standard is kind of good for a project manager for pen testers to understand. And that, and companies develop their own methodologies too, so they just kind of adapt it to that. But they need steps to make sure that they're covering everything and getting everything for the pen test that they need. Let's see. Also, code command injection is a type of attack. DOS attacks, session hijacking, man in the middle, credential reuse, brute forcing, password cracking. A lot of times you don't typically do DOS attacks in a pen test unless the customer wants to try. I mean, to a degree, it could be kind of like load testing on a system. Many attack types leverage common techniques. Most involve at least one or some social engineering. And for your red teaming exercises, they'll typically have some kind of social engineering involved, and some pen tests will be specifically just a social engineering or physical social engineering test. Common attacks continued. Private networks are difficult to access. Access techniques install socially engineered malware on internal hosts. It's also, you could drop USB drives to get people to install the malware, breaking into a wireless access point or remote access server, physically planting a malicious device on a network, colluding with insider. Exploits of payloads work together but not the same thing. Exploit is a mechanism that delivers the payload sequence of commands that takes advantage of this vulnerability. Example types of exploits: buffer overflows, code injection, web app exploits. Some tools rank exploits based on reliability and effectiveness. Example, Metasploit modules are ranked from manual to excellent. So this is kind of like some of the mentioned earlier about Metasploit. And usually the ones that are excellent usually have a higher success rate. Payload is code that runs on the target, performs a task giving the attacker control. Example payloads: interpreter session, VNC, other remote access, backdoors, malicious DLLs, worms. Also, like Metasploit, you can also like do an add user. So it's like you're trying to exploit the system, and if you're writing exploit code for it, you may not have enough space for your shell code to get an actual shell or command line to that system. So there's options where you could add a user. So if it's like a Windows server and they have RDP enabled, then you could add like a user as your payload and then use that user to RDP into the system and have a little more control than you would through just a command line. And also backdoors and Trojans, malicious DLLs, worms, or viruses. Payloads can perform tasks on their own or wait for commands, can open listening port and wait for attacker to connect, can make a connection back to an attacker, useful when victim is behind a firewall. Most exploit payloads are platform specific. That's interesting. James just shared that Metasploit has a module called Windows Speak Pwned. Ah, okay. It's the API that says you got pwned. Which is kind of interesting. At DerbyCon, someone had wrote a tool for hacking that it combines several other tools, but they actually use the voice commands, which at first you think, why would you do that? But the nice thing about it is as a stage completes, it will tell you. So you're not having to constantly go back, look at this terminal to see where it's at. You're getting these audible commands as you go along. So, so you're not having to just sit there, watch the screen. So yeah, with the payloads being platform specific. So say like if it's like Tomcat, then you're using like JSP for a Java server page. If it's Windows or Unix or Linux, then you'll have to use a specific payload for that. You usually have the choice of which payload the exploit delivers. Exploit sometimes delivers small payloads called stager. Lightweight and reliable, gains foothold on victim, downloads larger payload stager from the attacker. A lot of the stuff they use for red teaming uses stagers, downloads so much code at a time. Some of the command and control stuff that red teamers and some malicious actors use. Some payloads are self-contained, no staging necessary, called singles and Metasploit. Cross-compile code. Code has been compiled into executable on one platform, but designed to run on different platforms. Common approach when crafting your own exploits. For example, use Metasploit to craft a payload on Kali Linux. You want to send payloads to Windows, connects back to listener on Linux. Same tool on multiple targets is convenient and time-saving. So that's one of the nice things about Metasploit. Exploit modification, the process of changing an exploit that works against a particular vulnerability does not work under a certain condition. This is like one of the things during like the OSCP exam, they give you, or during the course, you'll have like buffer overflows. So you have to modify exploit code to work on different platforms. So say like you may have an FTP server that's vulnerable for Windows 2000, but say the operating system is like Windows 2000 in German. So you have to change that exploit code because it does change because of the language and even service packs. So you have to change it to work on that. And another advantage to modifying your exploit code is when you find exploits out there, you know, Tinker was talking about the risks though. One of the things that people highly recommend is examining that shell code and creating your own shell code. Because once it exploits the system, it delivers the shell code, which gives you your terminal, your shell, your command line access to that system. So a lot of times you want to either examine that code or write your own code, because sometimes it could phone home or connect to another server. So you're testing a customer externally and you got a shell to it, then they could be backdooring behind you, someone attack their system. So you want to be careful with those. That's one of the nice things with Metasploit is this stuff has been vetted and there's not malicious stuff. Now, if you will go out and download something that's not on Rapid7's site, then you may take the risk of something like that. But yeah, if you download some of the manual exploits, you'll want to make sure you examine your shell code or either create your own shell code, which you can create through Metasploit.
Question?
Yeah.
I've heard the terms stager and stage. Is that the same as an exploit and a payload? The Metasploit?
Well, Metasploit, it's a stager that if they stage and may be referred to a payload that's in stages, but a stager is like whereas a lot of the payloads are just delivered at once. This will like inject one piece and then from there it'll pull down more code.
You're evading detection. Maybe?
Yeah. Or sometimes say like if it's a buffer overflow, sometimes you have so much space to that overflow, that buffer you're overflowing, and you got so much space. And if you exceed that, it won't execute. So sometimes what I do is I take that little bit of code, execute that. Once that loads, then all of a sudden you got more memory freed up to inject the rest of the code. And then sometimes you could pull down code from another server when they're doing like command and control for red teaming stuff. Then they could have the stuff out on a web server, you know, maybe some cloud instance somewhere with that code once this first thing injects, because it's something you could actually send like through a phishing email. They click on it and then it requires more code. They want to keep it smaller and lightweight.
That's how some of those encryptor things work.
Ransomware? Or the ransomware?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. The ransomware, some of those you can actually get from some of the ads, some of the drive-by ransomware, because what people will do, malicious actors will hack websites, and those little ads, they'll connect it, like use JavaScript, and it'll download ransomware on your computer. So you just may go to some website that's got almost paywalls with the rotating banner ads on there, and it actually downloads the malware from that site. So it could be the ads are built into legitimate sites, could be Time Magazine, but someone hijacked this ad site, because you know how a lot of the websites you go to have the same ads or similar ads and articles. And so they go to these, they hijack that and input their malicious code on there. And so people go behind surfing that site and then get the malware injected or the ransomware injected from those sites. That's what they refer to as the drive-by ransomware attacks. Exploit modification. The process of changing exploit works against a particular vulnerability, but does not work under certain conditions. Example, buffer flow works against the Windows service, doesn't work in a service that has service packs applied, kind of like what I experienced with the OSCP, and it could even be different languages. Service packs, patch vulnerabilities. Author of service pack may have only worked with variant or vulnerability. Pen tester can modify, exploit, or account difference. That's where a lot of security researchers and malicious actors will watch the Patch Tuesdays before in the past. So whenever those exploits already been out there, they've got a fix for them. They're already downloading those patches and going to see what it does to fix that so they can go in and get around those patches. Debugger can demonstrate how target responds to modified code. Example tools for modifying code: Metasploit, Immunity Debugger, Android Debug Bridge, ADB, that's where you more commonly probably know it as, Java Debugger, JDB, and Mona.py. Mona.py is really good because it works with like, I think it works with like Immunity Debugger, and maybe, I'm trying to think it works IDPro, but it works in Immunity Debugger. There's some steps you'd normally need to do if you're writing exploit code that used to, you had to use Metasploit and type in a command called offset to see where you start your exploit. And then you would run another command to see the size of the payload space. And so like this plugin to Mona, it's a Python script that the Corlan team, so anyone's studying for the OSCP, you want to learn buffer overflows, if you go to core, C-O-R-E, land.be, they've got a lot of good tutorials on exploit development and buffer overflows, but they developed this Python script that you can run within the debugger that makes it easier to write exploits. And on Corlan, they actually have tutorials on how to use Mona. Exploit chaining, the act of using multiple exploits to form a larger attack. Success depends on all exploits doing their part. Distributed nature makes them complex and difficult to defend against. Some chained exploits must run consecutively, some in parallel. Examples: Metasploit exploit that gives user level shell, then privilege escalation to give system shell. Module run SQL injection, authentication bypass, and other exploits to give root shell. Physically planning device and an intrusion, then using the device to hack the systems. Distracting a guard so a colleague can tamper with an alarm, a system, while another breaks into office. And so some of these could be like automatic, which the last one, the physical security example, is not. But then you also look at if you're performing an attack, you know, the different steps you can perform. So say like if you're able to upload a malicious file to a Java server and get a shell to it, once you've got that access, if you're at a lower level user, then you got to do something to escalate privileges. So you may have to upload a privilege escalation exploit to that system to get admin. So when it comes to exploiting systems, you use different steps when you're exploiting that system, because sometimes you may get access to that system, but most cases it's going to be like a user level and not NT system authority or root. Proof of concept development. A benign exploit developed with highlight vulnerabilities, usually created by security researchers, demonstrates security issue to target organizations or general public. Technical aspects might be published in great detail, or researcher may not include specifics, discourages malicious actors from using the exploit in the wild. That's a pretty interesting, that last line there, say about that it may not be specific. A lot of researchers will create exploit code, these proof of concepts, and we actually used one the other day. It's for HP OpenView, one of the agents that runs on the server, and it was vulnerable to cross-site scripting. And what the cross-site scripting vulnerability would do, it would inject an iframe into the page, which the only thing you saw different was it added an additional IP address, and you could see the user agent. And for those who are not familiar with the user agent, when you log into a browser, you give the browser that user agent so it knows how to render that page. And so you usually have like the information on whether you're using Windows, Mac OS, Linux, or a mobile device. And you can actually use mobile device user agents to bypass security. But the user agent basically tells how to render the page, so that way you can see it correctly in that browser. So what this did was it injected the user agent and then an IP address, which just mimicked another line that was in there from someone being connected to the system. But when it injected the iframe, that's how it injected that information on there. And you could find that within there. It was like a pretty benign vulnerability because you exploit because it didn't do anything. But if you wanted to, you could weaponize it. Say maybe you could inject like a hyperlink on that page. So it comes up and the administrator sees this new IP address and they notice it's a hyperlink and they may think, let me go click on this hyperlink, see what I could do. And it could install malicious code in their system. So that's one of the reasons. And then you'll see some exploits to where people come up with a POC to exploit a certain vulnerability and it may just pop up the calculator. So you see a lot of demos out there that people are trying to teach people buffer overflows, but they're trying not to give people too much to not cause harm. So some of these exploits will have just like the Windows calculator. So you run the exploit, it'll just pop up the calculator window, but then you can go replace that with your own shellcode. And they're not always trying to prevent it. They just don't want script kiddie, someone to come along, just pull this off the internet, hack a system. So they think if someone really wants to use it, they're a pen tester or someone else using it, they're going to go through the work to modify it to get it to be able to use a shell to actually exploit the system. Deception tactics, primary mechanism in social engineering, create trust, fear, etc., to induce victim to reveal info or something they shouldn't. Common impersonation tactics, belligerent fellow employee who needs help, authority figure from law enforcement threatening arrest or legal penalties, new employees asking for help, IT personnel asking for someone to re-enter credentials, vendor or manufacturer warning about security vulnerabilities and offering a fix, customer trying to reset password, coworker using insider lingo to gain trust, asking for something to be done, friend or relative asking for help, vendor or creditor demanding overdue payments. That the authority thing, I don't run into, you don't see malicious actors, I would say, but people that are professionals that are pen testers or red teamers, you don't see them normally trying to be like law enforcement, but you do see people trying to pretend to be like someone who works for a telco company or some utility company. It's kind of funny, the sprinkler thing that Tinker brought up. I was talking to someone else recently about social engineering. Actually, my manager, he used to pen test years ago, and he was talking about using, I didn't even mention the sprinkler inspector, but that's, I guess, like a long time theme people have used. Because you go into a place people don't know. I don't know anything about sprinklers, and I'm not going to be able to tell you if someone knows or not. So that's a pretty widely used tactic to deceive people to come in and inspect the sprinklers, because then you could get into their server rooms or other areas that they normally wouldn't be able to access. Common tactics to offer something not needed, distributing malware disguised as free media, offering help if a problem occurs, sending false pop-up windows, asking for credentials. This is a pretty cool one. And if you look at the pen tester framework, let's see, I'm trying to think of the book. I think of the book. I don't know why it's slipping my mind, because I've got it. There's like 3 different versions of this out now, and it's, oh yeah, the hacker playbook, like version 2 covers that. They show you how to create a false pop-up, so it looks like you need to enter your credentials in there. So you could, someone clicks on something and you can make the pop-up look like a Windows pop-up and get them to try to re-enter their credentials. So that's one of the popular technique that they use.
Is that a good book you recommend?
Yes. Yeah, the version 1, I really don't see a reason why you would have to have that, but I'd say I would get version 2, and then version 3 goes more into red teaming if you want to learn about red teaming, which a lot of books are starting to cover red teaming, like the latest Gray Hat Hacking Handbook. I think it's either 4 or 5 that's out, and they actually in that book go into red teaming. So it's just getting more popular. There wasn't really nearly as much red teaming going on, but it's becoming more popular, and it's covered in those 2 books. But yeah, I'd say the The hacker playbook is good, is a really good one. They go through and even show you how to set up your own drop boxes so you don't have to go buy some of these expensive devices, how you can set up devices like Raspberry Pis for drop boxes and for physical testing. So it's really good. The guy that owns that, if I was ever in the area when they have it, they have like a meetup in San Francisco once a month, and they cover stuff like that. And sometimes they have classes there, but it's like a couple day classes teaching the techniques and stuff from the book. Task completion through social engineering. Attacker may need to persuade victim to do something for them, disabling or bypassing security controls, granting physical or network access, creating or resetting credentials, delivering messages, installing software, authorizing payments. Just like the example Tinker was talking about, the payroll, getting them to transfer the money. And someone in here works, was it you mentioned how common the transfers were? Someone was in here. Class had mentioned how common the bank transfers were, people trying to get people to transfer money. Connecting or disconnecting devices, reconfiguring systems. Dictionary attacks, an attack which password cracking tools goes through a list of words until it either finds the passwords or exhausts the list. Hope is that a large enough list contains a password. Most users choose simple, easy to remember passwords. Researchers have spent years collecting word lists. There's a lot of good word lists out there. That rockyou.txt is a good one. And they're constantly, there was one that just came out recently that was like 500 gigs. It might have been like a list, might have been a password hash list or something. Practical limitations: must know username. The users can also use word list. User lists can become unwieldy. Their size, 1.5 billion words, equals 15 gigabytes uncompressed. Lockout policies and authentication systems can affect that. That's where a lot of, when you do the brute forcing, you have to be wary of the timeouts or lockout for those accounts. And a lot of times that's better used if you get like a password hash, take it offline. Usually works better, that where you're less likely to get caught and less likely to lock out accounts. Bypassing techniques: steal a copy of a file or database containing the credentials, offline cracking. Induce system to dump hashed passwords, intercept authentication, and send to password cracker, run cracker against the network service without lockout, run cracker against accounts exempt from lockout /admin or root. And here they show a dictionary attack tool, brute force or Brutus. Rainbow tables attacks. Those you don't see as common anymore. When I was first started pen testing, we had rainbow tables, but with the hash crackers now, those are usually faster than the rainbow tables. An attack which passwords in a list have been pre-computed into their corresponding hashes, then compresses in a highly efficient manner. There's actually, I think, Hacker Hardware or something like that. There's a site that you can buy like lockpick tools and pen testing tools on there. They've got you can buy a hard drive from them that's like rainbow tables, that's got the rainbow tables on it. Works with stolen file or password hashes. Reduction function reduces size of tables. Example, 2.5 million hashes could be stored in a text file of 25 entries. 64 gigabytes of rainbow tables can contain around 70 trillion hashes. 64 gigabytes of word list can contain 6.5 billion passwords. Requires less computation power than plain text dictionary. Password crackers can use rainbow tables, include off-crack, rainbow crack, and CAPEC. Credential brute force attacks, an attack in which the attacker tries many passwords in hope of eventually guessing the right one. If a word list is exhausted, tool can try variations, substitute numbers or special characters, can guess an encryption key created by a password. Example, Wi-Fi password can use to create a hex-based key. Attacker can extract key rather than discover the actual password. Short passwords, for example, 4-digit pins can be brute forced in minutes or even seconds. As length and complexity of passwords increases, brute forcing becomes harder. If brute forcing isn't feasible, attackers might steal hashes and use to authenticate. And it's kind of cool, some of the password stuff, they have some tables out there too that are probability tables that is based on what passwords are more widely used or more commonly used. So they'll start out with the more common ones as they decrease. I think there's like scripts you can run against some of those lists to create those. Some people that are really good at that hash cracking, they've got like special rules that they can run against that using lists, and they can actually add characters and stuff to that to make it more successful. Guidelines for leveraging information to prepare for exploitation: record vulnerability to target mappings in a reference document, prioritize activities based on value of objectives, timing, and probability of success, choose exploits based on platform and ranking, choose platforms based on platform or payloads based on platform, connection time, effect, and level of control, cross-compile exploits on a single system. And sometimes when you're using exploits, you have to compile it on a similar system. So a lot of times this would be like the similar version of Linux you're running on. That's where it gets kind of tricky there. So sometimes you can't always compile in your Kali Linux install. Sometimes you have to actually upload it to that target server and compile it on that server. Use modified exploits against systems with different patch levels, chain exploits for greater success, use POC exploits as a basis to develop your own code, use deception tactics and social engineering to obtain desired information, choose password cracking techniques that best suit your needs. And speaking some of the POC stuff, that's where it's nice to have like a set of different VMs running. So if you got different versions of Linux, so you can try those POCs out on a test system before you actually attack the system in production. Some people will set up a server and then install the vulnerable application and try to test it on their system before they test it on the customer system. Because there's sometimes you could actually go in and possibly do something to harm the system. So you want to test it ahead of time to make sure it's not going to cause any problems. So this will be some, typically you'll see on that it could corrupt the system or something like that. So that's when you want to test those exploits on a separate system before you use it on a production target. Leveraging information to prepare for exploitation. So there's another one, scenarios that from your book. Time to take your vulnerability analysis results and construct a plan of action. You'll use what you've learned to select appropriate attack techniques. You'll then decide how to use these techniques within the pen test. So here you can see that their document where they have the different notes on the pen test for the results. Reflective questions, okay. Does anyone have any experience modifying exploit and payload code? Do you think you might do so in the future? Why or why not?
Would be more likely to do it now that Python works.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I would imagine any of you that are going through this class or working on the OSCP, you'll modify some code. And that's one of the things too with your level of programming skills, just knowing enough to be able to alter exploit code sometimes is a good starter point. I'm not really a developer, but I've been able to go in and take exploit code and modify it to get it to work. Discuss one or more instances which a false positive has led you to a dead end and how you dealt with it.
So stupid question, exploit
Yeah.
code. What is it usually written in?
It could vary. It could be,
Okay.
yeah, it could be like a scripting language or a programming language. It could be like C. You could write it in Java. It could be like Ruby, Perl, or Python.
Wasn't it all Ruby and Metasploit until the 5.x version?
Yes. Yeah, it was all Ruby then. Now they're allowing for Python because I guess they just expanded because there was so much Python going on out there, and so many people were learning Python, less people were really learning Ruby. And a lot of the people,
Brilliant move on there.
yeah, it is real good because there's so many people in the security community writing tools. So that would definitely help with that. And that was the only reason a lot of people in security would learn Ruby, just to be able to do to write modules for Metasploit. But then really you don't have to be a Ruby programmer. They've got little templates on how to write the exploit. So James says, not a ton of experience, but I modified an exploit module to work on a new version of Windows for Class. That's cool. So yeah, looking at some of those, if you ever look at how to write Metasploit modules, it doesn't seem, I haven't done one, but it doesn't seem overly complicated. They've got like a little template that the different parts that are required. But then you take a lot of researchers are starting to port their exploits over to Metasploit.
Usually if you can follow logic, you can backwards engineer something or modify it to etc. So,
Yeah. And then, a lot of people have been in technology for a while. You kind of learn to research and figure that stuff out too. So,
absolutely.
yeah, that's where a lot of cases for some of you that's been in technology for a while, just learning the terminology is going to help you be a better pen tester because, you may want to do a certain thing, but you don't know the exact terminology to it. But once you learn that terminology, then you're able to find the answers to what you're looking for. Because I have people, and I'm really patient with this. And one guy had constantly asked me questions about wireless and was asking like almost daily basis. And whenever I would respond to him, and sometimes I was just Googling it because some of these things I don't memorize all of it, and I don't know everything, and I keep notes on things. But it's kind of hard to commit everything to memory, know everything. But I would Google it, and then finally one day it's kind of funny. He replied back and he says, "Thanks for not telling me to Google it." Because and I thought about it, he didn't know the terminology, so some of this stuff he wouldn't have found. So learning the terminology definitely helps. Because they got that one site, let me Google that for you. I guess you send it. I haven't used it, but I guess you send someone the link with the link to Google or something. Or so anyone have any questions or comments on the lecture?
What lab should we be working for?
Anything that's listed in the book here, but I would go into the labs and start playing around with like Nmap. If you guys haven't done that, go into the labs and then scan those servers in there and then try the different switches and stuff to kind of get the hang of that. Because Nmap is going to be a really good tool to have there. Okay. Let me see here. Okay. Someone shared the link of let me Google that for you. That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. Okay. Let's see this. So the slides were a little shorter tonight. So when I was looking at before class, I was kind of surprised after last class we had 100 slides. Like I mentioned, this class is, the book is based on like a CompTIA class where you go somewhere and pay, take a 5-day class, and it's 8 hours a day. So like whenever we do slides, that's based on like half a class day. So 4 hours worth of slides and 2 to 2.5 hours. So tonight was a little bit shorter. Figured to do like some demos here today in class. When you get in the labs and you're wanting to, this one's kind of an interesting net discover. It does like ARP discovery of the different systems on your VLAN. So this is kind of handy if you wanted to, say, like if you're going to do a pen test and you didn't want to do like a discovery scan, you didn't want to be detected, and you're testing systems on that VLAN, you could fire up net discover and it will pull up the IP addresses so you can identify live hosts without being caught or discovered by doing scans.
So that's not just dumping your ARP cache, that's actual.
Disconnect. Okay, come back here.
Oh, Phil,
Yes.
quick question. Whenever you connect to like a Bluetooth device, does it recognize you by your MAC address? Do they initial connection, is it based on the MAC address or how does?
I haven't looked into that, so I'm really not sure.
Like when you connect to a Bluetooth device, how does the device know your device? Is it based on your MAC address or what is this? Still wondering because that's a MAC address.
Yeah, I haven't really looked into that. I would guess it would probably use MAC address because that may be how it probably because that, if you connect to the device, it comes up and tells you what it is. So I would bet it probably does pull a MAC address.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
I was just wondering, so the tool that you're running there, is that completing it that handshake, or is it just going to be like send packets coming out?
It's just using ARP. Yeah. Yeah, she's just using ARP to discover. So yeah, this is kind of nice too because it also does the MAC address too. So like if they had a NAC and you're trying to connect on that network, then you could pull up if you're not blocked already, you could get some IP addresses where you could spoof the MAC address to possibly get on the system.
Can I point out something that's useful to me? It's
Sure.
Pharmacy. See the MAC addresses, they all start with 0050.
Mhm.
That means they're in a VMware
Cool.
workstation. And if they're 00C0,
Uh-huh.
that means they're inside of the VMware ESXi server.
Oh, cool.
That's a way to determine who's virtual.
That's very cool.
And it can't be changed. That's how it is.
Okay, what happened here?
And so that's just whoever replies to that question.
Yes. Okay, trying to find here. I guess it.
Is it true for all other virtual software?
Virtual, I mean VMware. I
But
don't know about the Microsoft and Linux, but for VMware, it's always like that.
Yeah, because you can even, well, it even, that this is how it, like he mentioned, you know, you can see off to the right-hand side. It doesn't go into the detail of what version, but you can see off the right-hand side because for MAC address, it detects the vendor because, you know, vendors are, and that's where you can get into some of these, yeah, because this is run on VMware, but even like some of your Nmap scans. Let's see if I can keep this from file. New window. So now since we
can
have
just
some,
ping it and then look at your own ARC table.
can look at the topology because there's no use scanning our own system. Here. Is that too hard?
Wouldn't that only be useful though if the machines are on your subnet? If
Yeah.
your MAC address
Yeah,
is
you'd have to be on that subnet. Yeah, you'd have to be on that subnet.
I never found a way to escape that, to determine the remote MAC address.
And here's like a example Nmap scan. We're doing a service scan and we're just doing like the whole subnet. Or you could sit there and make a list with the individual IPs if you don't have to try to discover the hosts. And so something you might do for practice is get on in your lab, you could do it tonight or whenever you go home and just practice around Nmap. And with the content that you have with the book, in one of those folders, they have like an Nmap cheat sheet. So we can see what we discovered. Some of these don't have too many ports open. Let's see here. And so you can see on here that it's running VMware because it's still pulling that MAC address information, as James mentioned to us. Here you can see this other system that's Windows. It's running IIS, and you can see the version. So when you're doing these scans, you're looking for this version information. So you can go out to Exploit DB and then look up for Microsoft IIS 7.5 and look for vulnerable exploits against that. Because sometimes the operating system may be fairly secure, but there could be vulnerable software running on it. And you see this one server here. And so by default, it's just did the default, it scans 1,000 ports. So you can actually do a full 65K port scan or do like the top 200 or 100. And then you also see this Ubuntu server right here that is, it's, let's see, running ProFTP, OpenSSH. So you can look for these vulnerabilities and see if any of that could be exploited.
Where would you go to search for vulnerability for ProFTP 135?
Exploit DB.
Okay.
Yeah, like, let's see here, which is short for exploit database. Yeah, it's one of the things that's kind of ridiculous at our work. We've got this blocking the site. So we're pen testers and we can't get, well, we have to do, our systems are not, we have Macs and we connect through a Citrix VDI. So we're able to look through our system or other computers, but it's kind of funny how we're blocked on Exploit DB. So like Pro FTP. Let's see. We'll do a search on Pro FTPD. For those that don't know, don't realize it or know that the D stands for daemon, so it's like a service. So this is like the server, not just like a client, but the server. And so we're looking at 1.3.5, and this pops up right off the top. And there's a bunch of them in there.
File copy, would you just basically suck all files out of the other guy's FTP side?
What mod copy? It's I'm not really sure because it's probably like some kind of component of Linux, the mod copy, because you have the, let's see what it does. Okay, this module exploits the site CPFR/CPTO commands in Pro FTP version,
Okay.
and you authenticate.
So if it's not anonymous, you do not have credentials,
Mhm.
you can exploit it like this and then
Yep.
go ahead and suck out their files.
Mhm.
That's cool. Here I come, Cisco.
There's another one. I'm not sure if this one or not. There's one FTP version that the company that created it had like a backdoor built in. So like the username I think has like a semicolon. It looks like a smiley face that you can use to actually get into the system just using like Netcat or Telnet. But yeah, there's the Metasploit module, and typically after they've been out for a while, someone is, that's not what I want to do. Okay. Here's remote control execution. So these are more interesting. These usually end up with some kind of shell.
Are you logged in the lab right now? Could you do one?
Yes, I'm into the lab. Yeah. Yes, this is what the lab looks like. Okay.
If it's in exploit DB, does that mean that there's a Metasploit exploit ready to go?
There could be, not always. So if you look through here, if you look at this top one, if you look in parentheses, or maybe, yeah, you see that there's a Metasploit module for it. So it'll be marked whether it's Metasploit or not.
Okay. I read in the book about this search thing on the Metasploit, you know, search.
Yeah, searchsploit. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was a.
Yeah, searchsploit will search. It does a search on a local database of the exploit DB database. So you could do searchsploit.
Because to use it, you're going to need to know the path name in Metasploit, right?
Yeah, you can. Well, once you get in Metasploit, you load the module.
You got to know the full path to do that.
No, not necessarily. Not to. Once you're in Metasploit, you can do a search, and then there's only like a few lines that you have to. Okay, so here's Pro FTP. Okay, here we go. Here's some of the exploits we're looking at.
Mhm.
So this is what you have to load when you're in Metasploit. But the thing is, once you'll type in load exploit or use exploit, and then type in this code, it'll load it up. But
Now this search exploit, it looks like you're running it right off the command line of Colin.
yes,
It's not inside Metasploit.
no, it's not. It's just totally separate from Metasploit. And you'll find Metasploits. This is a local copy of the exploit DB that's on your desktop in Kali. Yeah. And so as long as you update Kali Linux, you'll keep the latest version. And it's nice until recently, the exploit DB website had captchas on it. It was the biggest pain. You go to search something, you got to click all the signal lights, and there's like several of them. And then sometimes you get it wrong, you miss something. So it's a hassle. And they got rid of the CAPTCHA codes, the CAPTCHA on there. But this is just nice because, for instance, you're in a company and they're filtering, not letting you get to exploit DB, and then you've got a local copy on your machine.
So you update Kali to keep this fresh.
Yeah, you update to keep that fresh.
Also update Metasploit.
If you got Metasploit installed the way just through Kali Linux, it'll update. It should update. There's like MSF update you can run too, but it should update with Kali. And like here, so yeah, you can see the different paths in here. These are all local here. I mean, some of these are text files. Some of the exploits, the text files are just information on how to do that exploit. Some of it could be just you type in, you use this certain username. It's just the exploit information that you just follow these certain procedures. You can see some of them. This is Perl, a Perl script. You can see some here that it's C. So you'll have to compile that. It's in C. Some is SH, so it's just a basic, just a Linux shell.
To service version, you were using nmap with a minus capital A.
Nmap minus lowercase s, uppercase v. That's for
Is
service.
that what you did to show us that
Yeah, that's what I did.
SV? Okay.
And for instance, you can run SV.
Right.
You can do like O, or actually the SC is another one I like because SC runs the default NSC scripts. NSC usually give you some more information, a little more detailed information because it should run some of the SMB scripts. And so it'll pull more information. Yeah.
Oh,
So this will give you a lot more, this will give you a little more detailed information.
wow.
And then run some scripts because say if something's vulnerable or whatever, then this could tell you. And then you can get into more detail because, you know, say if you're not scanning all 65K ports, there could be someone. Yeah, I saw someone say, can you demo one? Yeah, we can run a Metasploit module here just in a second. And to show you guys one of the first systems you can hack, because everyone should do this the first time they hack something. It should be MS0867. Which XP is vulnerable to. And so you can go in here and turn your firewall off to the machines you can get into and make it easier to break into. And this is some of the things with the command line. It was kind of fun during the OSCP. I was able to get into some of the systems and turn off the firewall. So some of the exploits wouldn't work, but once you turn off the firewall, you can do all sorts of stuff. Okay, so it finished running. See if it found anything extra. Okay, so now you're seeing the SMB information from those scripts. Before it didn't show as much information, it showed SMB, but this is showing like the domain name. The fully qualified domain name is just Ubuntu is the host name of that server. And this is showing like, so this is one of the things you can get where the false positives come in sometimes. It's saying, you look up here and it says Windows 6.1. And the reason it's discovering as Windows 6.1 is because it's running Samba. You can run Samba on Linux machines and make it look like Windows. You're not trying to fake anyone out, but if you want to share, you know, you've got folders you want to share between Linux and Windows, then you're able to mount those folders and go in and get information. So that's why you use Samba.
Do we still use Samba?
I'm not sure people are using it. You still see it in pen tests. But these systems are kind of purposely vulnerable so you can practice hacking. Some people complain about, you know, this Windows XP that's old, but you know, I did a pen test in December and I ran across Windows XP, so it's still out there. And when you start with something easier like that, the older technology, then hacking is pretty similar. I mean, exploits all work different, but the steps, how you find the vulnerability, how you exploit it, and then having something easier to exploit, you know, you're able to learn how to use Metasploit and all that. So it's got its steps. I mean, like you're learning a program, you learn Hello World. Is that helpful? No, but it kind of helps you start learning how to do something. And so yeah, you can see the different services on here running. Then it's where you can see it's got FTP on there. So FTP is usually something good to try to brute force.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So how does running a scheme like that on a device that's on a different subnet, how is that going to affect the ability for that scheme to work?
As far as like Nmap, it'll be fine as long as routing is enabled,
Right.
because Nmap's not dependent on ARP, but yeah, so you'll be fine with that. Like the Net Discover, you wouldn't be able to get over there, but with Nmap you would be able to get to it.
So that means.
long as it's
the
routable.
exploits are delivered by TCP/IP.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah. But see, there's some exploits. You can do some exploits. Some of them will use UDP, but that's because I think there may be some Metasploit modules that you can choose UDP, but it's just not as dependable. But maybe some cases that's the only way to.
Well, you always see beginning classes are on your subnet.
Yeah.
Right, now,
But we're not on the same subnet as most computers.
So we'll go ahead and run this one more time okay. We'll put this one switch in here, -T4, that speeds it up. We'll go back. Since I disabled the firewall, we should see the Windows XP device coming up. And someone asked to do a demo, so we're going to do a Metasploit demo here. May go ahead and load it up because it's taking a while. And to load Metasploit, it's MSF console. And going through and use Nmap like we're using, that's one way to manually detect vulnerabilities. But then you're doing a pen test and you've got like quite a few hosts. You'll want to use something like Nessus to make sure you don't miss anything. And your vulnerability scanners are going to help you catch the low-hanging fruit, anything out there that's easy detectable. You're not wasting your time trying to detect those items.
And you can take the output of the exploit or Nessus and import it right into Metasploit.
Yes. Yeah, you can import items in it. You can actually here, you can even run Nmap. Let's see if I can see what the Windows XP password is.
So if you run Nmap from inside Metasploit, it auto loads it into the Metasploit database. Right?
Yeah, to pull that into the database.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Oops.
So the Nmap that you ran outside 5 minutes ago, Metasploit doesn't know about that information.
Yeah, it doesn't know about that. And where I made a mistake, if I would have exported it to a file, I could have imported it
What
into
format do you need for that?
XML.
Oh.
Yeah, it's XML
So
format for.
Nmap, it would be -o
Yes. Or you could do the all. So say for instance, I recommend, so if you're going to import it into a tool, then you want to use XML. So I would recommend all three, because then you've got like the greppable format and then the regular Nmap format. The regular Nmap format's good for screenshots. So if you found some ports open, so you can like zoom into that area and take a screenshot, for your record showing, okay, this was run this version. So that's better for that. And then XML, you can even open in a browser if you got the right plugin installed and view that in a nice format. But yeah, if you export it to those three formats, then you've got your other files that you could use, the regular Nmap format. And then with the XML, you can import that into Metasploit. So 175. So here we'll go ahead and let's see. Okay, so D. And so you run Nmap within Metasploit, you do DB _Nmap.
DB tells it to
Yeah,
put this data
into the database, yeah.
So if you didn't append DB underbar first, it wouldn't save it?
It wouldn't save it into Metasploit. It'll still run it within, you'd still see the results, but it wouldn't import it. And here we'll go ahead and do this right quick workspace.
So if you've saved it, how do you access the data later?
You can go in, I can show you. Actually, we didn't load the database, so I'll do this is easier. Let's see, MSF DB. Initialize the database so it's loaded. So you can create workspaces. So if you're testing different segments of a network, you can have a different workspace. Or if you're doing different pen tests for different companies, that way you can keep it separate. And then after you're done with the pen test, you can go in and delete that database so you don't have that data on your computer any longer. So console, so go back in MFS console. This time our database should be loaded. Sometimes the database doesn't load if you do sudo MSF console, then sometimes the database will connect. There's different little tricks you learn. Okay, and so let's see, workspace, make sure that the database is loaded. Okay, so we're using the default. So we're going to add one -A, class is going to be the name of our workspace. So now if we type in workspace, now we see that we have class and default. And once you see the asterisk and it's red, that's actually what the workspace that we're using.
If you had another one called company, how would you switch?
Workspace, or here you go, we'll go ahead and we'll just switch back to default. Oh, it helps if you spell it right. Spell workspace right. Okay, so now you see we switch to, so now you type in workspace. And now you see that we're back to default. So, we're gonna go ahead and use workspace class. So, and we're gonna do DB, just a map. We're gonna do service and scans, -T4 for the, make it a little faster. Okay. Yes. So yeah, it pulls it into the database, and it's pretty interesting once you get information in there. So you can type in vulns, and it'll show you what vulnerabilities that were detected. You can type in hosts, and it'll show you what hosts are listed in there. So once we run the scan, if we do the hosts command, then we'll be able to see that that host is listed in there. So we're scanning that 1.75, which is Windows XP. And also one of the things I recommend too, if, like your home lab, or say like if you've got a VM set up to test with Kali Linux, then I would create like a shared folder that you can share between your virtual machine and your hard drive. Because sometimes if Kali dies on you and you've created custom scripts, or maybe you've collected information for your pen test and Kali dies on you, then you've lost all that work. So if you share, I learned that during the OSCP because I'd created some exploits, modified some exploits, compiled some code and some scripts, and it died on me. I lost all that. So after that, I started creating you can actually share your drives, which you're not gonna be able to do it through the lab here, the way it's set up. But like if you're running VMware or VirtualBox on your computer at home, then you're able to share that drive and save those files off so you have them. And that way it dies, you know, if you upgrade and just totally do a clean install, then you still have access to your scripts and your notes that you saved.
Is there a way to mount a physical USB stick to a virtual Kali?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can. I haven't done it, but the way you mount drives, because you could mount that as well. So we're scanning this, and we should find some good stuff on this one.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to ask. Like, if I'm working on the labs and I want to save my findings, whatever, and I know those labs, they have like a limited time. Like, if I book, and I want to have to save that work so I can maybe send
Yeah.
it as a homework, or maybe just keep it for for reference. That will be the case, because I'm like, I know once this the lab is off, it will like automatically erase my records, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
What you'll have to do there is use like an email, a web-based email or some kind of Dropbox, something like that, and then just copy your files. And if anyone, let me know if you can get to, we'll have to see if you can get to Google or not. That may be something I have to get fixed this semester, but students last semester would just copy the files over. That way you got them.
Yeah, I think that's explains it. I would love to play it like on my local Kali Linux that I have here, and see if I can like save them locally, like just in case, they all like they may die, as you say. So
yeah, because it'll time you up, and
definitely.
for anyone doing this, if you're away from your computer when the lab expires, it will shut down. But if you're still set in front of it, it gives you the option to extend your time. So if you need to get up for a break while you're using the labs, keep an eye on where your lab time's at. So as long as you can get back time, you can extend it and keep extending that time as long as you need to. But then when you have to shut down, of course, like you said, you're going to lose any work that you did.
Right. Okay, cool. I think I got an idea how to work it around it.
Yeah, that's the only downside to the way these labs are set up with that web interface. It's just that, plus the pros are if something happens to the system and you install something or set something up that broke it, then you're able to use it. It reboots and it's back to normal, which is a good thing. But as far as saving data, that's not optimal. But see, look what all we come up with now when we ran all those scripts, ran the default scripts in the service. Look at all the stuff we came up with. We've seen that, wow, it's running anonymous FTP.
You don't even have to hack that one.
No, but then it depends on what you can do there. So it could be, you can legitimately use anonymous FTP, although it's not good. If they got the directory permission set up correct, you may not be able to do anything. You may not be able to write to it or download. But yeah, that's not a good thing. And it's vulnerable to FTP bounce. That's kind of interesting because you're able to send traffic from a target host to another one with the FTP bounce. There's an NSC script for that. And it's got FileZilla open, FileZilla FTP. And it's running a beta version, and it's anonymous FTP bounce. So it's all sorts of vulnerable. There's Mercury Mail, which is vulnerable. And you see the SMTP relay is working on here because it sent the commands to there. And let's see, got Apache installed on there. WebDAV, that usually if it's vulnerable, you can upload files. There's a utility called Cadaver that you can use to upload files to it. And so you see all the different ports on the different NetBIOS ports open, 135, 139. And so look here. And so you can see the cipher strength that's using SSL version 2, which is not good. But typically with SSL stuff, there's not a lot usually there to exploit. That's where usually it's exploited for like man-in-the-middle attacks or something like that, but usually nothing to give you shell. And so here you go. This is what we're looking for right here. It's running Windows XP. So it's should be vulnerable.
Solid about that,
Yeah.
Nmap will give you chances,
Yeah.
98%, 80%. This one seems to be pretty firm.
Yep. And you can see the account used, so it's got guest enabled. That's not a good thing to have guest enabled. So the level user is user, challenge response, okay. Let's see, let's type in the vulns command and see if it detects the vulnerability for it. So it's kind of odd, it didn't detect vulnerabilities. So now if we type in hosts in that database, so we can see now for pull from Nmap. Come on.
Why do you think your vulns come in and didn't return any data?
I'm not really sure. It just didn't, I don't know, I guess, yeah, I really don't know why it
When I
didn't.
have imported from Nessus and Expose, Bones gives.
Yeah, that would make sense because it's been detected as a vulnerability, which it should, you would think it would here, but let's go ahead and search MS 080. So, okay, use.
So you typed the whole name there. What if you could only remember MS08? Would it have still found it for you?
Yeah, it would have brought up several options that start with MS. Let's see. Okay.
Okay.
It would come up with like several options.
Super.
Yeah. And so you can even search for XP. It would bring up XP exploits, which you probably come up with a lot more stuff. You can search on 2008 for like 2008 server. And so
in that case, if your service version says somebody's running 2008, then you search here.
yeah. So you just look on what you find there. You search on keywords within there, kind of like you did with search exploit.
Okay, so you're trying to match the results
Yeah.
of the service version
Mhm.
to the exploits available.
Yeah, and you want to keep in mind too, because sometimes they'll tell you like the service pack version, so you want to keep all that because there's some vulnerabilities and it could be based on service pack too.
How do we know what service pack 2008 is running?
It should tell you, usually it'll tell you like during your service scans, it'll show if like a service pack's installed because it'll usually have like SP1 or SP2. And so we're going to go ahead and exploit using MS0867. There's a better one here we can use that, but this is like the first hack you usually learn in some of these classes, and maybe now that it's getting kind of older that you're not seeing as much because you could use like Eternal Blue. Okay, so now we got everyone's see how we did that. We use exploit. It shows the path to the exploit, and it's just kind of broken down by the type of module we're using. So you see here at first, this first piece, it's an exploit and it's for Windows and it's SMB vulnerability. And then this is the Microsoft vulnerability number right here for that. And so we got that loaded. So we need to, if we do, let's see, show options. And this will show us what we need to set up. So we'll have to do more of this. We're going to have like a payload for this as well. But so we'll set the R host.
You would know what port to select by the service version results?
Yes.
Tracking.
And it depends on the vulnerability because it'll come up with the most popular one. But then sometimes you can change the ports for certain vulnerabilities, may use different NetBIOS ports.
So remote host is your XP machine. And
Yes.
our port number is the app that you're trying to exploit.
Yes. And when we set up our payload to exploit that, it's going to ask for local hosts. So we got to give it our IP address so it knows how to get back to us. Yes. MS08_067. So if you just search on that, you'll find it. Do a search on it. You're welcome. And so we set our host to our target. So everything else is good there. Exploit target, this is automatic. Sometimes you have to set, so there may be different service packs that this vulnerability works for, and automatic will just try to match the best match to it for the exploit. Some cases you need to manually check. So if it fails one time, then you may go back and look at the, like, let me see, take a show targets. So, okay, this shows the different targets. This shows the different versions. So I was mentioning the different language packs. So if you're doing a pen test in Mexico, then you're going to need to use like version number 69 or 68 for that language. So show options. So we get our host. So we need to load a payload. So we're going to show payload. Payloads.
So we do not have an interpreter yet.
Yeah, we don't have interpreter is one of the payloads. So you can use other things like there's like an add user that's a pretty cool.
Have we succeeded to exploit yet?
No, not yet. We've got to load our payload first. And how they mentioned earlier that some exploits are based on framework. You can see here. So like if you're using Metasploit, then you'll want to pick a payload based on that. Because it could be like some server like Apache, and it's running on Linux, then you're going to use like maybe a Java or a bind shell or reverse shell, opposed to like some of the Windows interpreter. You'll use like one of the Linux-based payloads. See right here, you can see the Windows add user. This one's pretty nice because if RDP is enabled, if you do add user, then it adds a user on that machine, so you can log in as that user. So we're going to use interpreter.
Payload, so
Yes.
You have exploited first.
Yeah, what you exploit it first, but we've got to select our payload before we can finish our Metasploit setup here. So we're going to set. Okay, set payload. And we're going to type in. So we're going to use a reverse TCP. You can use bind. It's like it connects directly to it with a reverse shell. It connects back to you, and that's usually a more stable connection if you have the option.
Escape through their defensive firewalls too, right?
Yeah, because it'll come outbound.
Internal outbound.
Mm-hmm. And so, okay, we do our show options again, and this is showing for the payload options. So we need to set our L host. So,
Thanks for letting me sit in.
oh, you're welcome. Take care.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
All right, we'll be in touch.
And would this work from a different subnet?
Yeah, it can work as long as it's routable. Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah. Also, when you come in here, if you can't see the screen, you're fine there. But you can also launch the online Zoom.
Okay, yeah, I forgot all that.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you can do that. You want you're okay to sit there. We just let you know because some people can't see back there. If I was back there, I wouldn't be able to see either. But it makes it a little bit easier to. Okay, so I just did an if config through my console to get my IP address because I didn't know my IP address. Show options. So we got our remote host that we're attacking. We got our local host, and the local port they have set already is 4444. Sometimes that may not work. You may need to change it to like 443, something that'll get through a firewall because that's kind of an odd port. And you know, a lot of these firewalls nowadays, people are very well aware of Metasploit, so they may change the ports to some, or block this port 444. So we're just going to go ahead and go with the defaults, and we're going to run exploit. So it's launching our attack. See, we got an interpreter session, so we actually got into the system. So let's see, get UID. And so this is NT System Authority.
So you can add users, change passwords.
Yeah. So we're able to, and so like on a pen test, you're going to want to take screenshots of this. You've got a foothold in here, so you want to show proof. And so one of the things you can also do is you can do like an IP config. Oh, yeah.
Is there one called sysinfo that people like to use?
Yeah, I think so. Let's see. And there's also like, so yeah, so we can see that we're on there on that system, and you can see like two different interfaces. So if it had like a legitimate interface connected to like another network, then you know you may be able to pivot into another network through there. Let's see. Help. Here's some of the other, like get system. If we would have logged in and it would have been just like a normal user, if you type in get system, then there's a good chance it could elevate your privileges to NT System Authority, which for those not familiar with some of the Windows permissions, NT System Authority is like root. It's like it's the highest level access on a local machine you could get. And so also we can do like hash dump and could dump the hashes. So see, you get the Windows hashes. There's some other ones that you,
Cut and paste those for
Yeah.
better hashing.
Yep. you could sit there and take that and use Hashcat to, and on some of the newer operating systems, you can use like the Mimikatz module. And what Mimikatz will do is it'll dump the passwords and dump the hashes, and you can dump like passwords in clear text. So that, and so also here we are, we just got this interpreter shell. You can do different things here. Let's see, directory. So you can kind of see the directory from there, but if you want to be able to see it better and navigate like you're in Windows, you type in shell. So here you have to do echo %. There you go. And so some newer versions of Windows, you can just type in who am I. So with like Windows XP, if they don't have certain service packs installed, you have to just do echo %username%, and that gives us the username, which is actually Windows XP internal, which since that's the name of the system, since it's run as system authority, it's giving you the name of the server.
So you've got a shell on their computer.
Yep.
What if you discover a lovely spreadsheet called creditcardnumbers.xls? How do you steal it?
Yeah, you just copy it. So like you could do like a net use in here to map a drive and then copy it over, FTP it over. So yeah, and that's one of the things that's a good point too, is when you're doing a pen test, a lot of times it's the information that's more critical than actually the level of access you get. And then from here you could do like, if this was dual home with 2 network cards on 2 different networks, you could do a pivot, so you could actually connect into, into another network from that system. You can do privilege, well, here we're at the highest level of this. If it was like in Active Directory, then if you had an Active Directory account, you could escalate privileges, try to escalate to domain admin. You can do lateral movement, where we try to connect to another system that's on the same network as this. And the next system you connect to laterally may have more information there. You may be able to hack something that is has a little more value than this system does. Okay. So if you exit out, it just takes you back to interpreter.
That got you out of your shell.
Yes, that's fine. That might be offensive to a turtle. Okay, so that's, and there's some.
So that shell there is in your XP system.
Yes.
Let's suppose you forget who you're in. How do you re-identify? Oh yeah, I'm doing that.
Let's see. Let me see. Help. Yeah, there should be like a. Let's see. Oh, sessions. There's like a sessions command it can show, because there's a way to interact. So you can have multiple sessions connected and switch between the two. And see, migrate. This is another good tool within another good option within Metasploit, because when you connect to that system, it could be some suspicious service you're running as, or maybe it's not stable. And so you can migrate to a different service. So you can migrate to some other legitimate program in there to try to stay stealthy.
Yeah. Notepad. I used to use.
So I know there's an exploit to clear the event log.
Yes.
Can you run that while you have the shell, or would you have to exit there and do the same exploit with that?
I am not really sure about that one, because what you could do, yeah, you may have to do that. I'm not really sure. Let's see. Some things require you to exit interpreter, and well, oh yeah, like clear logs or something like. Okay, it's clear EV. Yeah, so we should be able to run that in Meterpreter. Clear EV. So there you go. It just clean
That's
records.
really cool.
Yeah.
Presto, no proof.
They make this stuff so much easier because back before Metasploit, trying to do this stuff on your own, and there's some manual exploits for it, but you don't have all the functionality. That's why people usually you choose Meterpreter, because some of those other shells, it could be like a JSP shell, or like, you know, there's different types of shells in there, PHP, but a lot of them don't have the functionality of like Meterpreter. So that's why if you get a Meterpreter shell, you can do a lot more with it.
So what exactly does that command do, that clear red
It clears the logs.
on the actual computer on?
Yeah. So like, you know, you have your event logs, and so that way if someone came in behind you after you clear that, they wouldn't see that you logged in activity. So that's usually
Log you that log in. Doesn't that log that you were there clearing the logs?
I am not sure.
I don't think I've ever seen that. The closest they can get is bad people come in, they stop logging, they do their naughty stuff, then they restart logging. You can see that. You don't know what they did. You can see that it was stuff being done.
Someone, Doug, said that clearing the logs will set off alarms on a sim. Some people might use that if they're trying to simulate like a more of an adversary or more of a red team. They may clear logs. But actually, even if you're doing a pen test, logs are a good learning lesson for the people that manage those systems in the blue team. So you can go back and see what some of these look like. You know, what happens if you exploit a system and you're using Metasploit Meterpreter.
But you wouldn't do that in a test, right? You wouldn't clear their log.
No, I wouldn't do that. If you're doing a red, I don't know. It's funny but I guess if people are red teaming or something, they may use that. I wouldn't, but you know, because you got logs there, and if they know you're doing the pen test, it doesn't matter, you know. And like I said, it's probably a good learning experience. You know, you get these logs to go back and look through after the fact. Because I've known people like Tinker, when he was a SOC analyst, he would watch the network traffic whenever they're doing pen tests, so he could set alarms and triggers to catch that kind of stuff.
Can't you set your network devices to store their logs on a remote location?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that you're sending them instantly all the time. So when you come and you say clear on the local,
Yeah, you can send your logs to and I know there's they have logging servers and stuff. People a lot of times will.
What I decided to do, I just gave a couple options. I decided to do
Okay. So. Let's go. Log that vuln. Okay, so now the vulnerability is listed in there since we've exploited it. Yeah. So we're able to exploit it. Okay. So it did. Now it listed it.
What if you used it and it failed? Would it still be listed?
I don't think it would. And there's another thing, like if you get passwords and stuff, if you dump hashes, you can type in this loot command, and it'll give you the information there. Let's see. So there's all sorts of.
Suck those hash that we saw into your loot somewhere.
I don't know that you pull it into loot. Maybe if you did we did a dump hash.
I've only ever seen people do cut and paste just with the mouse and drag it.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be the best thing, because I don't think there's a way to actually, maybe there is a way to save it, but I'm not. Okay, so there's that. So it kind of gave you a demo of how Metasploit works and Nmap. Okay, so that ends the lecture. If anyone has any questions, anyone have any questions?
Very impressive.
Oh, cool, good. This is what I was trying to, I know some of the slides can be painful, but once we can get to stuff like this, And plus, after you go through that stuff, does it make a little more sense once you're seeing it in action? Once you see that, so yeah, that's good. Yeah, we'll be do more walkthroughs and stuff, and we'll repeat this too, so that way you kind of get the hang of it. So yeah, in your labs, then I would do stuff like this. Start running Nmap and see what you can discover and play around with Metasploit. And for the XP machine, go in there and disable your firewall. That way you can do more stuff with it. Still got to get them to loosen up the firewall rules on here, but yeah, this is good practice to get used to Nmap because you'll use that a lot. Also, yeah, let's see.
So they're not actual guides on that, right? Like what to do.
Yeah, there's no, because like if you remember the other labs, if you click on content, it would give you lab information.
Right.
Here, it just gives you the
So like,
password information.
I can open an app, just play with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just do whatever you want to. I mean, you go in there, try to hack into stuff. Yeah, there'll be activities in there, but if they're like telling you to do something like Nmap scan, then just use it in reference to this. So yeah, I would just play around with scanning the different devices and trying the different switches and see the difference. Because I mean, like when you're doing a lot of servers, and you may do like fewer options just to discover live hosts, and then you see interesting hosts with interesting services, then you can dig deeper on those and see. Like we didn't even do like a full 65K port scan on this, so there's possibly some things that we didn't get to see. And there's also too, when you're running some of these exploits, like see if we hadn't already messed up. Sometimes you run an exploit, you can't run it again until the system. Okay, so there's like the check command for Metasploit, and it doesn't work on all modules, but some. But this is a good one to run to see if the system's vulnerable to begin with, because there's no use going through all the steps if it's not. And so you just type in check, and it doesn't work for all of them, but you can see it check, and it shows target is vulnerable. And then you can do like Rexploit, which is our exploit, and it reloads it. It doesn't start over, but it reloads it. So sometimes you run an exploit, it kind of doesn't work right afterwards. So if you want it to kind of reload clean, then you do like the our exploit command. And there's different modules and stuff that you can use as well. We'll go over some of those at another time. And then we'll cover sometime soon. We'll go over like some of the Nmap NSE scripts, because there's some things in here that would be interesting to run NSE scripts against.
Is there an exploit that lets you see the victim's desktop and drive mouse?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, but there's like some keystroke logger plugins and stuff, but I don't know about exactly.
There was a way you could just email yourself the stuff you want to steal from their hard drive.
And some of these are some of the exploits allow like keyloggers, so you could actually get like passwords. Someone gets on that system, and you could collect passwords that way.
You gotta come back tomorrow and see what they typed in there.
Yeah, it would like put it to a file or something like that.
Yeah.
What's that? Yes.
Is there a good tutorial for uploading your own code just for prioritization, or like using your own code in the console?
There's some tools on writing Metasploit exploits, and maybe they would show how to submit them. I can look that up and send that out.
Load your own code.
Yeah, you can load your own code. Yeah.
Okay, without, like,
Yeah, you don't have to submit it. Yeah, you can just load it yourself.
See that tab name we type all out? If you, and there's something at the end, right? You know, exploit.rb. If you wrote exploit.rb and dumped it in that directory structure, then you.
There's tutorials on how to do that. So I know for sure if you did create your own module, you would have to exit out and then exit back in to load the modules. There may be a command you may have to do to load new modules. So if you created something, I forget, but there's some tutorials on how to build your own module. So it'd be a fun exercise is to find an exploit out there and write a module for it. See if you can come up with a module, a Metasploit module.
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay, so that's that ends the lecture. So y'all can work on the labs or in here or you're at home or whatever you want to do.
Is he Christian?
No, I ain't seen him in a while, but we stay in touch on like text message or Twitter. He's working at S3, but man, they're not very nice there. I mean, they're kind of jerks about stuff. And if he has to work late, hold on, let me stop recording.